I'm here with Coach Bradford Scott. This is a little bit of a unique situation here because Coach Scott we worked together about 5 years ago. Okay, so I was starting in my career, had no idea what I was doing, cold called a bunch of coaches, sent a bunch of random emails, and he was one of the coaches that was kind enough to respond to me. And so he had offered me the position, and things were going well. And then this is actually when I tore my ACL, so it was a little bit of a unique situation because he still decided to take me on, and so we have a history together, and we've been able to continue to work together, to grow together, and to help each other grow. And so really honored that he's on here today. And so Coach Scott, for the listeners at home, you tell us a little bit about your background, kind of who you are and where you come from.
Yeah, one, thank you very much for having me on. It's always a pleasure to do these, and you've had some great guests, so I'm honored to be in the company of those that you've had on prior to me. I'm Brad Scott. I'm a strength conditioning coach and massage therapist. I've worked in the industry now for about 20 years. I originally came from Boston and did an internship at Northeastern University, and then from there was a grad assistant at University of Arizona and worked with some great people there. And then from there, moved on to Cal State Northridge for a couple of years as a director at a young age, and then went to USC for a couple of years, and then was at University of Portland for 10 years, working with that department, and then most recently I'm with the Atlanta Braves now for finishing up my fourth season.
Okay. So what's kind of your passion in life, right? So you got massage therapy, strength and conditioning coach, all that kind of stuff. Why do you do what you do? Like, what kind of got you into this?
I think for me, honestly, as a young age, I was a young kid. I was the youngest of five, and just trying to keep up with my older brothers. We were always involved in sports. We were always involved in kind of lifting and training, and it always just seemed to make sense to me. I enjoyed being at the gym. It was kind of a savior for me when I was a young kid, and I just became fascinated with reading everything I could about how to get stronger and better for my sport. I was a wrestler. And so I noticed the harder I trained, the better I became in the ring. And the better, when I was in school, I was just really intrigued by the human body. I loved the physiology courses. I loved anatomy and physiology. And so that's really what kind of took off. To be honest with you, I think the profession kind of found me. Where I was doing my internship, I had studied exercise science, and I was at Northeastern, and at the time, the gentleman who was running the department had lost he only had an assistant, and that assistant had moved on to take another job, and next thing I know, I was kind of acting like a full-time strength coach. I went in there, and I was basically there from noon until 8, and he would help me write the programs for the teams that came in, and that turned into a grad assistant position. And honestly, I had no idea what a grad assistant position was. I just he knew that he believed in me and that I had some promise. And that led to me working at the University of Arizona and getting a master's degree and working with Brad Arnett and Neil Ramp and Preston Green and Steve DeLuster, these guys who were just huge impacts on me as a professional. And ever since then, it's just always been trying to figure out the human body. There's so much to know. And just being in a weight room is where I feel the most comfortable personally. So
yeah, I like that. And so your initial educational background, if I remember correctly, it's a little bit different than most, right? So you were involved in law, if I remember correctly, at some point?
Well, I did. When I was going to school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was kind of working at a gym, still competing in wrestling. And then I didn't know if I wanted to go be a cop and be a state trooper in Boston, or kind of do this exercise thing. So I actually double majored in criminal justice and exercise science. And once I took that internship, that's where I kind of spun off into a strength conditioning.
Do you think that double major has kind of helped you in any way, or do you think that's added another layer to you that a lot of people don't have?
I think right now having kind of a dual credential just makes you curious. I think it's more of my personality than anything else. I'm trying to see, I look at it, I actually just had a thought the other day. I was like, I wonder what FBI profiling would do, and how does that work with profiling your athletes? And how do you become more socially aware of what's going on with the person in front of you, with the environment, with the culture that you're trying to create? So I think it can have, like anything, I think as long as you have an open mind, you start to create and cross-pollinate across, multiple disciplines to kind of become a better version of yourself, and therefore hopefully become a better version to be able to lead a staff, lead a department, and lead your athlete to where you want them to go as well.
Okay, I like that, and that kind of just made another thought pop into my head, right? So within strength and conditioning, there's a lot of there's a dichotomy of people that are just trying to get jobs, right? And then there's the people that are trying to get jobs, but also get their values worth, right? So would you have any kind of anything to say on coaches or getting what you're worth within the coaching field while also kind of working with the populations and helping to grow and that kind of thing?
I think the biggest thing is to be patient, to be a really, really hard worker. And what I mean by that is part of it I think has kind of consumed my life. And I don't know if that's the healthiest way of going about things, but I was just always trying to improve and get better. And so for me, I remember in grad school starting this thing where I had to buy a book with every paycheck. Because I knew that over time, if I continue to read and get better personally, then those other things that you spoke of will start to take care of themselves. I think how you provide value is, do you show up on time? Do you do the little things? Do you show that you care about your athletes, care about their programming? And then do you have a really good, solid foundation of what you're operating from? One, your own moral compass, the character of who you are. And how authentic you are as a coach begins to shine through, and then how you lead, whether you're leading a department, leading your athletes, that starts to shine through to administration, and that hopefully starts to prove your worth as well. I think you have to kind of look at it from a very global perspective.
Okay.
A piece of advice that kind of stuck with me when I was going through massage school, this woman, one of our instructors, she said, how long, she proposed a question to the class of, how long do you think you're going to work for? And most people essentially are going to work for 40 years. You kind of figure out what you're going to do at 25, and the average age of retirement is 65. And she said, she said she had been doing this for 13 years. She wasn't even halfway through her career. And I kind of I'm coming up on year 20 in this profession. And there's so much that I don't know, and there's so much that I'm curious about, that I'm still a beginner. And I think if you have that type of mindset, then that starts to transcend a lot of other things, and stuff will naturally start to fall in place. You'll see opportunities, you'll meet people, and the authenticity will start to come through. So I think it's more about being patient and kind of putting your time in, but really, really putting your time in. I mean, when I was at Cal State Northridge, we had platforms that were made out of plywood and stall mats stapled down to them, and I was making that the best weight room I could. I was going over to Home Depot and painting them, and painting the walls of the weight room on a Saturday. I didn't have to do that stuff, but it was kind of like this was my weight room. This was going to be clean, this was going to be professional, this was going to be organized. It didn't matter if the weights were shiny or not. It was the athletes could see that I was taking care of the room, and therefore I wanted to take care of them. So I think it's kind of how you do one thing is how you do everything a little bit too.
Everything affects everything else. You
can't cut corners to then turn around and say, oh, I should be getting paid this much, but you're trying to cut corners here and there, and you're not doing the little things correctly that you need to do.
I like that. Okay, so diving into a snapshot of that time that you spent in Portland, right? How has that kind of set you up for success now?
I think my environment in college sports was awesome. And what I mean by that is I got to work with so many different teams. I mean, there was times when you'd have 300 athletes that would walk through your weight room. And you had to create a space that was very positive, a space that athletes wanted to come to. They were drawn to coming into the weight room. Not everyone likes to lift weights, but if you can make it fun, you can make it competitive, and you can show that you care and you meet the athlete where they're at, I think that gives you a really fun place to operate and go and spend 12 to 14 hours a day in, so having this multitude of, whether it's, you're going to have women's tennis come in, then followed by men's basketball, then rowing, and then women's volleyball. So you're mixing genders, you're mixing sports, you're mixing cultures, you're mixing sizes of teams. So I think having this giant experiment as I was continuing to learn and read and grow as a coach, you're starting to figure out what team you can start to apply these little micro experiments with. Whether it's, hey, I'm going to try this wellness questionnaire thing. What team and what culture is this going to fit in? And how do I do this on kind of a smaller scale?
Yeah.
And then how do I kind of grow this across the department? So I think, honestly, having that diverse background as a generalist has given me a great opportunity to now you're able to relate to so many different athletes. You've gotten so many reps coaching different exercises. You get so many reps talking to different coaches themselves, and what they find value in and how they're trying to create culture within the bigger entity of the athletic department. So how has that set me up for here? In my current role, I think it's set me up because I might be dealing with a 20-year-old athlete who is an insane superstar in his particular sport, but they're still a 20-year-old kid. So I need to be able to relate to that athlete. And, you walk in and they're almost on the level 100 courses in terms of exercises. They're starting to figure out what is their routine to make them a successful baseball player. Who are they as a person? How do you kind of relate and become a mentor to them? And then you're also working with a athlete who's maybe 35 years old and maybe on the tail end of his career. And so how do you relate to them as they started, they've got a family, they've got a lot of miles on the tank, so to speak. So how do you keep them healthy and continue to get them, if they want that extra year on their contract and kind of prolong their career, how do you relate to them? And then you've got the guy in the middle who's kind of like, he's got a pretty good solid training base. He's kind of bought in. And so how do you keep him going and kind of continue to push him as he's got a couple of years in the league, but he really hasn't, he's coming into a good contract year, and you want to make sure that he's producing at the prime of his career.
Okay. So what are your suggestions for people trying to get into professional sports?
I always say I'm going to take a job for who I go to work with, not for. So don't always necessarily think about professional sports. Just think about sports in general. And I think when you walk in, it's not necessarily the size of the program that is going to give you the best opportunity. It's the program that has, when we looked at what we were able to do at the University of Portland, we had interns that stayed for almost 2 years. Like, people weren't getting paid, and they still came in every single day because of the environment we created. So I think it's a matter of seeking out the environment that you are going to thrive in, and then bring something to the table every day that you do go in there. I think it's a massive give and take. And so if you're going in and you're always trying to take from the head person and take information and then pawn it off as your own, and you don't have a good understanding of it, it's probably not going to last very long, and you're probably not going to get very far in your career. Versus if you come in and you're reading and you're contributing to the department and you're contributing to the athlete's success, and you're a part of the department and really a part of the team, I think that's what's going to set you apart, and therefore your chance of getting in and excelling in professional sport or in collegiate sport is going to help you in the long run.
I like that. Okay. So let's switch gears a little bit. Let's kind of dive into training, right? Will you give us kind of an overview of this training structure of the organization you're at now?
Yeah, I think right now the biggest thing that we try to look at is making sure an athlete can play every day. It's a unique sport where we have 162 games, I believe, in 180 or 184 days.
Yikes, okay.
So every day they have to be able to play. So you have this large amount of stress that is imposed on the athlete through their game. Then there's a lot of stress that's involved within the environment of, you've got late nights, you've got travel, you're getting in at 4 or 5 in the morning, so circadian rhythm disruptions are going to be big. There's a lot of non-specific stress that these guys are under. So the way that we start to break things down is usually I think of things in series.
Okay.
And so the first day of a series, generally we could have gotten in at 3 or 4 in the morning. If we're traveling and you're getting into a new hotel bed, so we generally want to move, and movement quality is going to be huge. And what I mean by that is it may be doing linear speed session. It might be doing a multi-directional speed session. It might be going through some primal flows, if you want to call it that, or a good dynamic warm-up, a little bit of med ball work, a little bit of light plyos just to kind of get the system ramped up to be able to go and perform that evening.
Yeah, yeah.
The next day, we know that the schedule is somewhat stabilized a little bit. So we'll go through more of a total body lift, if that's what I tend to think of, more total body than it's like an upper or lower, in which you're hitting multiple planes of movement, multiple regular, whether push-pull, squat, your basic patterns, but then what other patterns do we need to make sure that we're getting from a health standpoint and then from a movement quality standpoint. So they'll be loaded, and then usually the third day of a series is going to be a day game.
Okay.
So you might play at, say, 7 and 7 and then a 1 o'clock game. So you have to factor in what you do on that, say that second day is going to have a limited recovery time because you got to turn around and play a lot earlier the following day.
Yeah, yeah.
And that day is kind of a little bit more of like, what do you need from us? And so it's a matter of working with that athlete and developing a relationship of kind of an N equals 1. Is what's the guy in front of me need, and how do I continue to make sure that he is ready to go out and give his best effort for the team and for himself that day.
Okay. So how does that kind of differ from the college setting, and what are some of the major nuances to be aware of when working with professional athletes?
Within college, I think you actually have somewhat of an off season. And so, you get an athlete in, he's a freshman, you can kind of put them through this battery of testing. If you look at we used to do resting heart rate recovery, we would do a yo-yo, we do a mile test, we do kind of your FMS screen. You kind of look at kind of this massive battery of testing. Yeah. And then that testing was woven into, that testing drove prescription. And we were always monitoring, was the athlete getting better, because our testing was woven into what we did.
Yeah.
And so you're going to have an athlete for 4 years. You know that kind of a little bit of a general framework of how the season's going to last within a collegiate setting. So you can do a little bit more, and you can be a little bit more aggressive.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, from an exercise selection standpoint, we used to use Olympic lifts with the majority of the teams. So we knew we had the time to teach the lifts and to have them excel at those lifts, and what our carryover was that we were looking for.
Yeah.
Within this setting, all of a sudden the trade deadline hits, and we might get a guy who shows up the next day. And so he walks in, and his last 24 hours have been complete chaos.
Yeah.
He's got to suit up with a new team. If he's got a young family, he's got a wife and kids at home that now he's got to figure out, how do I get them to the next city? How does she pack up the old house, move across the country? There's a lot of other contextual factors that come into play with what he has to deal with, and then shows up. So you think about it he's in an alarm stage, right? He is in the red, regardless of what we think or whatever omega wave or whatever you want to test. You just kind of know that his environment is basically in chaos.
Yeah.
So a lot of the times when an athlete comes to me like that, it's more about building a relationship with them. What has worked well for them? What have they succeeded in up until this point? Because if you think about it, it's worked for them.
Yeah.
Our team has identified that they're going to be a major part of our organization. So now how do I have to be more of a facilitator and conduit of what he's already been doing? And I know that over time, as I build a solid relationship with him, that my programming and our programming as an organization will start to weave its way into his daily routine.
Okay.
And so you have to have this very broad spectrum of tools to be able to understand, where is this guy coming from? What does he work? What works well with his structure? You might have a pitcher that's got 10 years in the league that weighs 185 pounds, and a pitcher who's got 10 years in the league that weighs 225 pounds. The way they both throw over 90, 95, they both are really good pitchers at being able to express their skill. The way they go about achieving that skill is completely different. One guy might like to squat heavy because that's what he feels really good, and another guy just wants to move and do yoga. So you have to have a very general skill set of whether it be kettlebells and barbell lifting and Olympic weightlifting and kind of your West Side template and like there's got to be, you have to know a lot about a lot of different avenues of training.
Yeah.
To be able to identify, how do I meet that guy where he's at and continue on his path of success of staying injury free, moving well and strong enough to be able to perform his skill every night.
Okay.
When called upon.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so kind of taking that into more of an even broader scale, right? So how do you get guys on board that don't necessarily have a big training background, right? So some of that stuff was kind of answered, I think, in the question prior, right? But someone that's like really not done a lot of training, like how do you get them on board?
It starts honestly with a relationship. And so, how you carry yourself every day, you going up, making sure you say hi to them, looking at other ways that you can get wins with them.
Yeah.
You see a guy who's sitting there having lunch, sit down with him and chit chat for a couple minutes. See how his day, get to know who he is as a person.
Yeah.
The biggest thing I try to do is get to know who these guys are off the field, because everyone is always their time, and everybody's always wanting a piece of who they are as a player. And I'm just trying to figure out who they are as a human being.
Yeah.
And I think that goes a long way of what their interests are outside of the field. And then that slowly starts into, hey man, like how you doing? Sometimes it's, unfortunately, sometimes it's a little nagging injury.
Yeah.
That, hey, like, you check in with the guy, hey, how your legs feeling? Oh, this isn't, well, have you checked in with the training room? Hey, once you come in, we'll do a little bit more of a warm up with you.
Yeah.
And you kind of give them a little bit, and you start to build slowly and surely off of that. I think sometimes too, it's breaking down the fears of previous experiences they've had in a weight room.
Okay.
Sometimes they come in and it's, when we were in college, we did like a football program and I didn't feel good. So I'm not going to, we're not going to do that. And coming in and saying, hey, we just need to move today.
Yeah.
Why don't you come in and do some body weight workouts? And so by meeting them where they are, you start to break down those fears and you start to build that level of trust. And then that level of trust can slowly manifest itself over the course of the season and hopefully over the course of a long career with the organization.
I like that. Okay. So what are your big rocks in training with these guys?
I think the biggest thing is, a lot of things goes through my mind is how do I set them up to be able to play that night? And then how do I set them up? Where are we in the point of the season?
Yeah.
Right now we have a high chronic stress load.
Yeah.
We are in the last month of the season. Hopefully, we're going to be playing into October. So how do we make sure that they're feeling really good? How do we make sure that they're developing over the course of the season? In terms of big rocks, it's do they move really well? If we keep them moving well and recovered, I think when we look at recovery, it's what type of recovery we're trying to get. So from a systemic standpoint, we know that movement has a recovery benefit to it. So that's coming in and doing some prehab work. Yeah. And maybe some light med ball work. And then getting in the sauna or getting in the cold tubs or kind of what system we're trying to get to recover from. Big rocks, are we training in planes? What velocity are we looking at? Where on the force velocity curve are we training? Sometimes I'll put together a workout that will try to hit and touch on each points of the force velocity curve in a circuit, kind of like a complex training methodology. So are we covering our bases from an isometric, eccentric, concentric? Are we covering our bases from a strength, speed, strength standpoint to maximal strength? Are we covering our bases from an individual injury standpoint of single leg and our accessory work? How are we looking at that? Are we covering our bases from I always think of like what vector am I trying to create power in? Is it a vertical vector or horizontal? What planes are we looking at? And are we integrating some of the fascial planes into what we're doing? So you might do like a true stretch routine into a viper routine into throwing a medicine ball into swinging a steel club. So you're kind of having a multitude of different tools that we're using over the course of time, over the course of the season to meet that person where they're at. Okay. And then also using specific tools like a gym aware. How do we auto-regulate their training based upon all the chronic stress that we have to make sure that we're getting objectable measures that we're trending in the right direction. Whether it's measuring vertical jump, we're integrating some of the force plate technology into what we're doing and kind of get into that more so this upcoming season, for the 2020 season. And so you're starting to look at, how are you putting them on a heart rate monitor and monitoring load and what the objective is that you're trying to create from an adaptation standpoint. So I think a big rock as well is like always keep in mind what adaptation you are seeking, and then it's kind of fitting what tools fit with that particular athlete that will hopefully express that adaptation that you're seeking. And honestly, it's all kind of an educated guess. I think we think we're hitting this, but I think it's just a micro hypothesis of this is the best educated guess for me to get the best educated adaptation I'm seeking from this particular athlete. And so I think it's kind of, I don't know if we are or not. I'd like to hope to think we are, but I think there's some other things that are coming down the line that hopefully will streamline that process even more.
For sure. Okay. And so you kind of made a good little segue into that, right? You guys use GymAware and some heart rate type stuff, but what other technology or like recovery modalities have you guys been able to implement, and how have you been able to use them?
I think from us, the biggest thing is when I came over, when my previous position at University of Portland, we were doing kind of post-RPE, we were doing morning resting heart rate, a morning wellness questionnaire, a morning sleep tracker. And we all just put this on Google Docs and then linked it up to someone's iPhone. It was very easy and innovasive. Then we were doing, your vertical jumps when you came in. We were looking at heart rate recovery, and everything was based upon your max aerobic speed. And it was a little bit different style of how we were doing that. Okay. As I came over to the new role, one of the things is if I tried to push that culture, it's like I always say you're hired for change, but the rate and the magnitude of which you implement that change determines whether or not you stay. Yeah. And it's a very traditional game that's, that I was working with. It was a very traditional weight room prior that I was working with in culture. So as we came over with the Braves, I had to look at and saying, what is the one thing? The first thing was I got to get the guys excited about training. I need to define what is the new culture of training. So we didn't use any technology the first year. It was like, come on in. This is what individualized training will look like. This is where I'm going to coach you as best I can, and I'm going to, coach you, so to speak. And then the next year we implemented heart rate training. So, hey, if you're going to come in and go through a workout, throw a heart rate monitor on, it'll show up on the screen, or if you're going to go out and run and condition, here's what conditioning protocol we're going to do. And I had to blend some of the old school, like, hey, we're going to go out and run pulls. So it was the old school methodology and the language that they understood, but I just need you to do it at this heart rate. And in my brain, I'm saying, okay, this guy's getting, aerobic capacity. Here's what heart rate he's looking at from a, cardiac output standpoint. This is kind of what we're looking at. Now, as we've kind of continued to build trust with the guys are coming in. Now we're looking at auto regulation with GymAware. So are we hitting our speed objectives for where we are for that particular athlete? And then are we hitting our set? So I look at like, here's a set range and here's a rep range. And based upon how we fall off, then we know when to cut it. During the off season, also, as we're training some of our guys, we'll test everything that when we're doing our sprint work, everything will be timed. And then as their sets starts to drop off of more than 95%, if there's a 5% drop off, then we will adjust and say, hey, you're done for that day in terms of sprinting. Okay. So there's somewhat of an auto regulation standpoint there. We're beginning to implement our force plates. It's more this year we bought it. And so we're picking it around with it as a staff. And really starting to understand it before we then begin to implement it. And then there's some other, in terms of recovery modalities, things that we're looking at right now, like, yes, we'll use kind of your compression garments, whether you guys are flying in compression pants. We'll use kind of your pneumatic compression, whether it's your Normatex or your recovery pumps. We'll look at traditional massage. Being a massage therapist is something, if you get in there, I always think if it's been around for thousands of years, it's probably worked. That's another thing within technology is I try to do. I think Juve right now in red light therapy is definitely getting some buzz, and we're starting to use that with some of our guys. Have had some good effects of that. The sauna is a big recovery tool for us as well. I think it's also a performance enhancing tool. The way that we'll use it. We may have a guy, especially in our environment, especially at the beginning of the year. They call it hot Atlanta for a reason. It's 90 degrees on a day game with 90% humidity. So how do we get them those heat shock proteins and kind of the big growth hormone release that we're looking for within the sauna? Sometimes we'll have a guy do a conditioning session and then finish in the sauna for another 15 to 20 minutes to continue to get that type of heat acclimatization that we're looking for. And then I would say that's probably the main. There's definitely some others, but I'd say that's kind of the main thing that we're looking for. And then obviously you have your contrast therapy, cold water therapy. I think there's definitely something there. From a float tank perspective, we don't have one, but I know that the science is pretty bought in on float tanks. I think from anything that we can just get our athletes, they're so sympathetic dominant. How do we get them to switch into more of a parasympathetic state? So whether it's different breathing protocols that you're trying to teach an athlete, awareness, to be able to kind of shift into that state.
And so moving with that, right? So it kind of goes hand in hand. What kind of nutritional recommendations do you have with athletes in general? Like obviously with an organization of your size, you probably have some dietitians and things like that, but how are you able to kind of support those efforts on your end and ingrain some good habits and things like that?
I think nutrition's a big thing. We have a nutritionist, which I'm very fortunate to work with. I think the biggest thing is hydration. So how do we do in-game hydration? So for example, our catchers, we will literally put bottles of a carbohydrate solution and a salt solution together. And we'll literally label it 1 through 9. And so every inning you have to kind of have a bottle of hydration, so to speak, to cut down on that. We'll also do that for the starting pitcher and put together some coolers that way. We'll also, in-game nutrition, I'll put together like some type of smoothie for a couple guys. That'll have some type of, usually like a coconut water, some pineapples, some bananas, some type of simple sugars, and a little bit of the vegan protein. Vegan protein, it just seems to digest a little bit better for you guys versus a whey in-game. It kind of make you feel a little bit bloated. So that guys are getting a little bit of calories, especially during a day game. It might be a light breakfast, and then by the 5th or 6th inning, they're starving. So those are some of the things that we'll look at from an in-game nutrition standpoint. Outside of the fact, we're looking at how do we provide just good overall nutritional support. So working with the nutritionist who's been great do we have salad bar options and a good healthy options at each place that we are, and then kind of working with guys too is some guys forget to eat because they come in and they automatically are thinking game prep. So we always think about hydration first. So there's certain guys that will literally put certain solutions or a shake in their locker that's there for when they get there. And so you're trying to get ahead of the curve and be proactive with them. We know that hydration, sleep, and nutrition are kind of your 3 bedrocks of recovery, so to speak, and performance. So how do we get the hydration piece squared away? And then with the nutrition standpoint, it's also working with guys that may not have an appetite after after the game. So you're making a shake for them that's kind of a calorie bomb, so to speak, of like good nutritious products, but that they can just kind of sip on their way home, because they don't feel real hungry because they're still kind of in that heightened sense. The guy comes he literally just came out of the 9th inning and he's all tuned up, and the last thing is like his appetite is suppressed because he literally just came out of a fight or flight situation. So those types of things.
And then moving forward a little bit more into some leadership, continuing education kind of stuff, right? So you've been in a director role for a large part of your career, right? And so across the board, kind of what's your approach in managing your staff, and how does that look?
I'd say the biggest thing for me is like we have to be a team. And so and we have to know what our objectives are.
Okay.
So we have to know what is our vision, what is our mission, and kind of what are our guiding principles and department objectives.
Yeah.
So I tried to really work with how do I outline those in very clear ways, and then does everybody know what those are?
Yeah.
And then, okay, cool. We know what our vision is. We know what our mission is. We know what our guiding principles are. These are our kind of compasses of which we are going to make decisions. You know, like, are we a process over outcome, kind of growth over fixed mindset, science-based over opinion? You know, are we, you know, focused on the entire 24-hour athlete? Kind of those types of things are guiding principles, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then what are our objectives? And then from there, it was a matter of how do I educate and empower the staff to then understand, you know, we have a weekly meeting. During that weekly meeting, here's what is coming up for the week. Here's kind of where we need to go. Where are we forecasting for, say, at the end of the semester or the end of the year? Meeting with each staff member to go over multiple times a year. I always thought it was interesting how I only got reviewed once a year.
Yeah.
How do I actually make any changes? Like, team management is coaching.
Yeah.
So how do I make sure that I'm checking in and building, like, what is the goals of the employee and what are my goals that I have for that employee? And can we meld them together? And then can we hold each other accountable throughout? Because I expect my staff to also hold me accountable to what I say I'm going to do.
Yeah.
In the same sense that I'm trying to hold them accountable to what we say we are going to do and they are going to do.
Yeah. Okay.
And so working with management, and then also, do they have a job description? What is their actual job and what responsibilities to put on them? Okay. And then making sure that everybody else knows their roles and their responsibilities. So if, you know, I'll never forget, I had a family emergency come up at the University of Portland. But everybody knew what was on my plate. And therefore, all of my assistants at the time just stepped right up. They were phenomenal, but it was because they understood all the different technical aspects of my job, of what coaches, what teams. They had shadowed and worked with teams. And I always said that these are our teams because this is our department. So yes, I may be the primary coach for men's basketball, but I want you to review my men's basketball program as a staff so that you can tear it apart. So then in case of, say, the family emergency, well, guess what? They all understood the objectives of the men's basketball program when they had to take it over. All the coaching cues were the same that the team had received because we had trained together as a staff and coached each other on multiple programs. So it's a matter of kind of, you're a team within a team and managing that team going forward. And then having the vision to see, like, you know, as you sit down with your staff and you're starting to acquire pieces of the puzzle, you're definitely looking at, like, character first. I always hired on potential. Was the biggest thing, because if they were curious and asked good questions during the interview, if they're prepared, and the way that their resume looked, you know, we would interview our interns, quite honestly, and we put them through the ringers. And it was really interesting because I felt like the toughest critics were my interns of the people that when we were hiring new interns, you know, like they were very protective over the department, and that was the best part. Because they wanted to not just let anybody onto the team. It was who's going to be the best fit. And having everybody have a voice within the department and share what they've learned. I think if you have this learning open environment, that's very clear cut, so to speak, and then managed accordingly. And I think that's how I've been successful personally in trying to run a department. I would say, are you running a department, or are you building a program? And I was always trying to build a program. And so I wanted people on board with what it meant to build a program. And then we're looking at other programs, both nationally and internationally, to say, how do we come back and make this place better?
Okay, so what is the distinction for some of the listeners between just running a department and then building a program? What does that kind of look like?
I think running a department, you're just kind of reacting, quite honestly. I think you're the guy that changes the date from one season to the next, and that's your program. You're kind of stuck in your old ways, and you kind of haven't figured out. you're not really empowering the staff. When you say you have an internship program, it basically means you've hired people to come in and clean. And it's always somebody else's fault when there's a problem. Versus building a program is having a vision that you're spending time really devoting to, that you are getting people on board with, and then you're saying, this is how we're going to do it. Like, this is how we're going to build something. And you're giving back to the program. You know, like, my interns have taught me so much over the years. It doesn't matter how old you are, you know, or how long you've worked for in the field. Like, you have something to contribute. So building a program is essentially like, what are you doing outside of the program? How are you being resourceful? Are you a person that's restrained and saying, oh, I've only got a $2,000 budget for Con Ed. I can't go to, my staff can't go to that. Or you're saying, hey, wait, listen, we have an anatomy lab on campus. Let me get a hold of one of the instructors, and let's see if we can go over there and take our performance staff over to the cadaver and actually have an anatomy lesson. You know, like, that was one of the big things. And my big thing too is, when I was building a program, was that I could never pay anybody any more money. Like, they could do a fantastic job, but you go to your athletic director, you kind of plead for their raise and whatnot, and show all the different things that they've done to provide value. But at the end of the day, sometimes it's only 1 or 3%. It's kind of disheartening, unfortunately. So I remember just saying, well, you know what? I'm going to take my tax return money, and we're going to start a conference. And I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to educate the hell out of my staff. And if we start educating each other, then things are going to grow from there. And you know what? That was the best $1,500 I ever spent. And then it turned into a conference the next year. And next thing you know, we invited people into our space, and we built a community, and then other people saw our space and what we were trying to accomplish, and the amount of people that came out in the community of Portland to help was huge. And the next thing you know, as a staff, I think we had done like $15,000 of Con Ed that year. That's big. You know, so I think it's a matter of just being resourceful, and when you find a problem, like, attack the problem. And go into it with an open, authentic mindset.
I love it. Okay. So what are some current continuing education interests that you are kind of diving into?
Personally, right now, I'm kind of all over the map a little bit. I tend to hit on a few different things throughout the course of an off season. I tend to do some type of soft tissue course in order to keep my hands good from a massage therapy standpoint. I tend to look at something like with our monitoring or technology-based course. So right now I'm enrolled with some of Matt Jordan's work on the force plates as an online course, as I'm kind of really trying to figure those things out. My personal development, I had done the Strong First Kettlebell Level 1 and Level 2 the last 2 years. This year, I'm looking at doing the body weight certification through Strong First, and possibly the barbell one, or one or the other. It just depends upon our playoff schedule. So I like giving. What I found is that in baseball and in my environment, I need something that's like a North Star to get me out of bed every morning and just make sure that I'm training for something and continuing to hone a skill. So I'm looking at those two objectives. Within return to play, there's always some type of rehabby thing, because it's such a big part of what we're doing on that continuum. And Derek Hansen's course is something that's of interest to me as well. He's a man that I haven't had a chance to speak with, but I think he's putting out some good products and something that I'd like to learn from. And doing it in a very authentic way. He's not just like selling something to sell something, so to speak. But unfortunately, you see a lot with our industry. So I'd say those are the things that I'm kind of looking at right now from a personal Con Ed standpoint for this off season. I'm also looking at, I think a lot of times we tend to think of Con Ed as being technicians. And so we're always geared towards how do we get better at strength and conditioning. In the last couple of years, I've also looked at like more management courses as well. So this past year, I took Dale Carnegie's course. If people are unfamiliar, he wrote the book How to Win Friends and Influence People, which I highly suggest reading. And that had been on my radar for a number of years. Honestly, I remember reading the book. It was Mike Boyle suggested it in 2005 at a Perform Better conference that I was at in LA. Mm-hmm. And then he had been a business teacher for a number of years, and it's just something that I couldn't afford for a long time. But I took that last year, and then Harvard has some continuing education courses right now on leadership and influencer leadership and management. So I'm going to be attending one of those this offseason as well.
Okay.
So I think kind of looking at it from like a management standpoint, and then what are the buckets within training of like a rehab, a soft tissue, a kind of workload or technology and monitoring standpoint. So how do you kind of pick from each of those buckets to make sure you're kind of getting those touch points over the course of the off season?
I love it. Okay. And so shifting gears once again into some professional development for young coaches, right? One of the things that is really kind of unregulated and nobody's really sure what to do is like format applications and all that kind of stuff as far as resumes, cover letters. So obviously it's different at every organization, right? But generally speaking, what are your kind of format tips for resume, cover letter, and like references?
So one, always send your resume in PDF format. Do not send it in Word. I repeat, do not send your things in Word. That's just a very big pet peeve I have of mine. Within your resume, I think one, is it professional looking? It doesn't have to have a lot, but you can tell a lot from someone's attention to detail. You're leaving clues in your resume. So make sure the clues of what you want people to get and receive are the objectives that you want in terms of getting a job. You know, are they detailed? Is it spaced right? Does it look right? Does it read correctly? No spelling errors. You'd be surprised at some of that stuff. Or formatting errors that are there. One of the things as well is that everything has an opportunity to make you a better strength coach. So if you can tell me that you worked at Home Depot and you were in customer service and you know how to deal with the problem of somebody, help someone out, and then show that you can navigate your way around, like you have to be able to sell the experience that you have and turn it into how that's going to make you different as a strength and conditioning coach, especially as a young coach. So if you were a camp counselor, then how were you basically able to communicate well? How are you able to organize large groups? And then how are you able to teach those large groups objectives of what you were trying to accomplish? Whether it's an arts and crafts at a camp, whether, you know what I mean? Like, how do you create structure? So there's so many ways in which you can mold your experience into being a better coach. You know, you look at some of the best coaches that I've seen and or listened to, and it's like they were PE coaches and then high school coaches, and now they're like sustainable, you know, Super Bowl champion coaches in the NFL. Like, you have to start somewhere and show progress throughout. Within your cover letter, it's not a regurgitation of your resume in paragraph form. I already know what you've done because your resume told me that. Your cover letter is a sneak peek into what is your values, like who is the character of the person I'm dealing with, what is important to them, and what are they looking for, who is their personality and their interests, and how are you going to add value back into our department. Stop telling me what you're looking for and start telling me what you're going to bring to our department in an authentic way. Okay. In a unique way. If that makes sense.
Okay. So on that same note, do you have any recommendations as far as like resume length or when internships should be removed from that resume?
No, I don't. I think as resume length is how concise are you to be able to explain what the objectives are. I don't understand why somebody said like resume has to be one page. Like, I don't know, if it's really good, then it's formatted and it shows appropriate information that has been asked for. That's another thing too, is like, did you answer everything that they asked and complete it in the way that the application process was written? You know, if it says email one cover letter or one document and now all of a sudden I receive 5 documents and they're all in Word, guess what? You're probably going to fall to the back of the list. Okay. So that's something to kind of keep in mind.
Okay. And then moving forward to this kind of last segment here, right? So if you have any, what are some quotes that you live by?
one that always comes to mind is the more you live, the less you die. And what that kind of means to me is that how do I continue to be aware of my surroundings and take in certain things? How do I put myself in situations where I get the butterflies? Because it means I'm probably growing if I'm a little bit uncomfortable in that situation. So that's definitely something that I tend to live by.
Okay.
One that I had mentioned before was kind of buy a book with every paycheck. I think no one can ever take your education away from you. But only you can dictate how much education you receive. And so I think the sum of your daily habits and how you structure your day depends upon kind of how successful you'll be in the long term.
I like that.
So, I remember being a poor college student and figuring out like, hey, I remember like buying Science and Practice of Strength Training, and like reading through that and going to a coffee shop and coming back and buying Core Performance by Mark Verstegen back in the day and reading through that and trying to figure out how that was going to benefit my athletes. And then over time, it just kind of morphed into this love for reading and love for exploration and this curiosity of how do I continue to be a better coach and a better human being.
I like that.
So, and it doesn't cost you anything, It's like, cool, I can either make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or go to Chipotle. But if I make a PB&J, I can buy a book for $10, And now there's so many really good resources on the internet. It's a matter of kind of deciphering or going on and reading through research and kind of being able to understand that stuff.
For sure. Okay. Is there a thought or experience from your past that you've held on to that's made a big difference in your life now?
I'd say, I kind of alluded to it earlier. I was doing my internship at Northeastern. And when the grad assistant position came up, I remember going home and talking to my mother and saying, hey, Mom, I've got this GA spot. Basically, I can get a master's degree and they're going to help pay for it. And taking a chance and saying I remember thinking to myself, like, all right, I'm leaving, I'm driving across the country. I know no one. But this could be a pretty cool experience. And if it doesn't work out, I can always come back home. But how at a young age, at 21, you're driving across the country, no one, but knowing that like, you're sleeping on a mattress on the floor. Actually slept on the floor for a while until I got this really crappy mattress from someone that was moving out for $100. And then you're trying to make the best of your situation. And, I met one of my best friends in the world and was mentored by some of the best strength and conditioning coaches and more or less just people that really took me under their wing. So kind of taking some chances, like this profession's very difficult. You give up a lot. I always say sometimes it's like you're together alone. You're at work a lot, but you're alone in your alone time. It's the weirdest thing. And you learn a lot about yourself as you move across the country. And so I'd say that's definitely, those two experiences definitely shape you and change you. But sport also has the opportunity to, right now I get to travel to multiple cities and meet with great professionals. And I really make it a point to get up and network across the country as best I can for the benefit of my athletes. If I need an athlete that's going to be training in that city, to, identifying talent if we need to hire somebody, to just growing as a professional and sharing ideas with some people who are just way smarter than myself and that have been gracious enough to open up and share their time and open up their facility with me.
I love it. Okay. What is the best advice you've ever been given?
I really have no idea. I think part of it is I'm getting older. I remember my father, he'd always say, figure it out. Like he never gave you the answer. And I hated him for it as a kid, but as you start to kind of get older and put things in perspective, I think no one's ever going to give you like the instruction manual on how to live your life. You kind of have to figure it out as you go, and you figure out your career and what your values are. So there's definitely some of that. There's also, I think, this level of just hard work. And self-discipline that was instilled on us as kids. That my mother and father both, it was just kind of how we did things. As they were very just not strict in a bad way, but they would just, it's like I was the youngest of 5 kids. My mother didn't want chaos in the house. She was going to run a tight ship.
Yeah.
And you had to kind of do your work.
For sure.
And make sure you're doing things.
Okay. So in contrast to that, what's the worst advice you've ever been given?
The worst advice I've ever been given?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, man. I don't know. I don't know if I can answer that, quite honestly. I think it's all in the context of which the advice has been given.
Okay.
I don't know if I can answer the worst advice.
Yeah. Fair enough. Okay. So last question here. What are some projects that you're currently working on? How can people kind of reach out to you and follow your journey?
Right now, honestly, I'm just we are in the awesome part of the season, quite honestly. Some people say, oh, you're in the grind of the season. And to me, the grind of the season is, coming out of spring training and you're making that flop from getting up at 4 a.m. to now trying to stay awake at 9 p.m. because you're making the time of the game switches.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, honestly, it's kind of looking at making sure our guys stay healthy.
Mm-hmm.
What can we do to make sure we have a strong playoff run? Making sure I take care of myself personally so that I'm in a good spot to give the best that I can give to them. In terms of what I'm looking at, I think that there's some stuff out there with the wearable resistance and what John Cronin is doing. In the Exogen, I think that there's definitely something there. It makes a lot of sense from a biomechanical standpoint, from a physiological standpoint. Now it's just a matter of testing it out on myself personally and kind of trying to tear it apart and then see how I can implement that with some of our guys for sure.
Okay.
I'm getting into the Moxie unit. I remember Mark McLaughlin talking about that back in 2014. And now it's starting to really kind of get some traction. I think there's some people in the community that are doing some great things with it. I think it gives us high quality objective information of how we can actually know. We talked about earlier, like a lot of your program design is just a hypothesis. I think this actually gives us a insight into what is physiologically happening when I prescribe, say, that conditioning session. And how does that body and that person react to this particular conditioning session. So from an auto-regulation standpoint, more of a pinpoint standpoint, I think it's coming out of it like sometimes you go at it from a shotgun and this gives you a little bit more of a rifle
I like that.
into knowing what's going on in that regard. So those are some of the things personally, and then the force plates, I'm kind of digging in on those and trying to pull those apart and figure out how objectively we're going to put that into our staff and into our organization, and how we can prescribe exercises off of that to make it more individualized. And then as far as following on in my journey, if you want, Twitter is probably the best way. I'm not really a huge social media guy. I tend to be a retweeter, unfortunately. Don't have a lot of originality, but I'm working on it. It's at Bradford TNS, I believe is my handle on Twitter.
Okay. Awesome. Well, Brad, thank you so much for your time. This has been long overdue. Glad that we were finally able to nail down a time and get you on here. So thank you, and looking forward to connecting again soon in the future.
Definitely. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you again.